Hello, everyone. Chris here, your mentor at the Lorcana tutor, going over the next part in our Inks of Lorcana breakdown. Today, we will be going over Sapphire, strategy, planning, and inventing to win. Sapphire has access to the keywords ward, support, resist, and evasive. Now, I put resist and evasive with an asterisk next to it because Sapphire has the ability to give your other characters resist. None of the characters themselves have resist. And all of the evasive that happens is conditional, meaning that when we see it evasive, it just has it on your turn, not just overall evasive, which I think is a smart design decision because I think each color needs to have an answer for evasive. If not, I think it would just be too strong. So giving it the ability just when it's on your turn so you can at least challenge them, but they're not as hard to deal with as having evasive all around. Now, I think Sapphire has a very clear design space. And the first thing that comes to mind when I play Sapphire, look at Sapphire cards, is the ability to get extra ink out, or what we call ramp. Ever since set 1, we've seen some staples that are still used in Sapphire decks now to get more ramp or more ink than your opponent on the early turns. So something like Fishbone Quill, where you can put an additional card from your hand into your inkwell face down. What's nice about this is that you can even do uninkable cards, so you give yourself a little bit more flexibility in deck building and when you're playing. We have something like Mickey Mouse, where you just take the top card of your deck and put it into your inkwell. Effects like this are really good because it is a form of card advantage, right? You're not using something from your hand, you're doing something from the top of your deck, and you're putting that into your inkwell. Which you wouldn't normally have access to. So cards like that, One Jump Ahead is the same thing, but it's just a song, not on a character. How Far I'll Go lets you look at 2 cards. You put one into your hand and one to your inkwell face down. And then with Tipo, we kind of have the same effect as a Fishbone Quill, but it is a one-time effect. This Tipo was introduced in the newest set and has been seeing a lot of play in the Sapphire decks. Sapphire also has the sub-theme of items and caring about items. The big finisher for a lot of these Sapphire decks is this big Tamatoa, where it gets +1 lore for each item you have in play. So some of these Sapphire builds are going to play a lot of small little items that they can then banish with Hiram to draw more cards. I think that Hiram's probably considered to be one of the best, if not the best, draw engines in the game. So when you pair this up with Popsicle, a 1-cost item that you can draw a card, you banish it with Hiram, you get 2 more cards. If you quest again, you get 2 more cards. You can bring those items back with Tamatoa. Later on in the game, you're looking to pair that up with this Lucky Dime, which you can exert to then just gain lore equal to a character. So if you have a Tamatoa down with a bunch of items, you can pay 2 to gain 5, 6, however much lore Tamatoa has based on the items that you have. And then this other card, Ariel, that has 3 lore normally, but if you have more items than each opponent, it gets an additional 2 lore, and it also has ward, so it's a really good target for Lucky Dime because it's really hard to deal with. So all of these things are part of the main game plan. You'll see in some decks we have some other items that we introduce, but this is the general item subset that we'll see combined with that early ramp in the Sapphire decks. Now, one of the things that's interesting about Sapphire is I think that it has a lot of tools to deal with different problems that may come up on the board. So we have the ability to just get rid of a character with Let It Go and Hades. The one downside is that instead of going into the discard pile, it goes into your opponent's inkwell. Very flavorful, and it is definitely something to be wary of, where giving certain decks an extra ink can be quite beneficial for them. So I know for me, playing Ruby Amethyst, anytime one of my characters goes into the inkwell, it stinks, but it also is like not too bad because I can just try to ramp out or play more cards next turn. And then the last couple sets, we've been seeing the same idea with items and locations. So with this Cusco, we have the same ability where you can put an item or location into the inkwell face down or exerted. And then we also have it on an action, which is Hideaway. So there's a lot of ways to deal with different threats that your opponent may have, but there is a downside being, okay, well, it's going to go into the inkwell, not into their discard pile. And another thing that we see within Sapphire is the ability for card selection, not necessarily card draw. It is a card draw, but it doesn't just say card draw. And I think sometimes when assessing the cards, if it just said draw a card, people would think that it's a little bit better than it is. But this effect is better than drawing a card because you are looking at mostly the top 2 cards of your deck and you're picking the best one and putting it into your hand. So like develop your brain, look at the top 2 cards, put one into your hand and the other on the bottom of your deck. I think that that's a really, really good card. It just helps with the consistency. It helps you dig a little bit deeper, which we'll see a little bit later, into getting the answers that you want. And seeing this on a body, like something like this Grammatala, which is a 3/3, we do the same effect. In Ruby Amethyst, the Maleficent 3-drop, which was a 2/2 and just draw a card, saw a lot of play until recently. And I think that this card is just an extension of that, and I think it didn't get as much love. It is now being used quite a bit in a deck that we'll look at a little bit later. But the same thing with this Gaston here. We can look at the top 3 and draw a card from that. Just because they don't say draw, I think sometimes it gets not as much credit as it deserves, but it's a really, really strong effect. We see this card dig a little bit deeper, which can be sung by multiple characters, and you look at the top 7 and put 2 into your hand, and then Vision of the Future, look at the top 5 and put 1 into your hand. So taking all these aspects that we look at, that we've seen so far, we're going to look at probably one of the strongest decks in Lorcana right now at the end of Shimmering Skies is this Ruby Sapphire. So if we look at the Sapphire cards, it's pretty much everything that we talked about. We're using the early turns to try to get more ink, to get to the later turns to play some of our big removal characters, whether it's Medusa, Be Prepared, Maleficent, and then try to build up our board to get Tamatoa down to get more items and win with Lucky Dime and stuff like that. Really strong deck. I think this deck has one of the ability to gain all this ink way earlier to just go into a Be Prepared, I think is one of the more unfair things that can be done in Lorcana. And usually if you're doing something unfair, that means that it's pretty strong. We saw that one of the keywords that Sapphire has access to is Ward. And really there's a couple that see a lot more play. We already talked about this Ariel, but the other one that sees a lot of play is this Cogsworth. So it has Ward, it's a 2/5, but it also gives all of your characters resist 1, which can be really strong. We'll see the synergy that this has with another deck that we're going to look at a little bit later. We do see some other cards that have seen some fringe play. In set 1, we saw a little bit of this Aurora, which gives all of your other characters Ward. It's a little bit slow right now. And then we also saw this Aurora seeing some play. Mainly, so again, it doesn't say items have Ward, but your opponents can't choose your items for abilities or effect, which is pretty much Ward. And it also has the ability to exert one of your items to look at the top card and either put it on the top or the bottom. In Magic, we would call this Scry, but again, it's just being able to see, oh, do I want this card? Yes, leave it on the top. If not, put it on your bottom and hope that your next card's better. So we see this mainly the Cogsworth we seeing a lot of play in this Sapphire Steel deck. So the early game is pretty much the same plan. We're ramping a little bit differently. We're still using Fishbone Quill, using Mickey Mouse, but this deck also is going to put in a couple of earlier threats really because of this Smee that's able to quest for 2. It's a big body, so it has a little bit more flexibility, and it synergizes really well with the Cogsworth, so normally at the end of your turn you have to deal 1 damage to it, but if it has resist 1, it doesn't take that 1 damage, so it just works really well. But the Sapphire game plan is completely the same, just we're using the steel tools of removal. Sometimes in this, I think it's more popular historically to use a Whole New World with this, so maybe you play the Cogsworth that can sing the Whole New World. This is a version ran by Moyen at the Seattle DLC, which did no Whole New World, and just working towards a little more mid-range, getting the aerials down, still using your Lucky Dime. Same Sapphire win conditions, but just a different flavor. And I think just a cool thing about Sapphire in general is just that it has a lot of like flexibility in what it's trying to do. So these are just some other cards that I just kind of pulled out of the pool that I think have seen some play here or there, just kind of shows the different aspects that Sapphire can work towards. So for example, here we have the Cruella de Vil. That is, like we talked about, it has the evasive, but only on your turn, so it's really good for challenging evasive characters. Back when Minnie Mouse Surfer was a card, this one would see a lot of play. This would be good for, you know, taking out Diablos. This one hasn't seen too much play, but I just wanted to put in something with support. So the ability to quest and give another one of your characters additional strength to challenge into either your opponent's locations or maybe your early threats. This card got floated around a lot when we thought Daisy Duck was going to be an absolute menace. Not that she's not, but you know, being able to say, okay, I'm going to turn one, I'm going to play this. And maybe if you're in Ruby Sapphire, you play the Queen of Hearts Rush. You can quest with this and take out a Daisy in one turn. Great Stone Dragon is a card that sees situational play, or maybe one of, where it's pretty much like a Fishbone Quill, but you're using your discard and you're only going to put character cards from there. So talking with some local people, they're really good in these kind of grindy matches where your characters are dying and then you put this down and you're pretty much able to get an extra ink for free because you have all these characters in your inkwell. And then this location, McDuck Manor, has seen a decent amount of play going through. It's definitely more of like an aggressive option. Having 9 willpower on a location that gets you 2 is really good. I think it's up there in contention with Queen's Castle for better aggressive locations and such. Now, I have one more deck here to highlight. This is the known as Blurple or Amethyst Sapphire. It does all the Sapphire, all the Amethyst things that you know from the bounce package and such. Just adding on some of the ramp from Sapphire and then building up to, you know, trying to get to a wider board state. You still have the Hades to control the board a little bit. We get this Scrooge McDuck, which is just a good body, 5/5 that quests for 2 for 4. We're trying to get down McDuck Manors and all of that. Now, in Sapphire, the general how I think about it, I think that it has the best ramp, and I think that being able to ramp is a very, very strong thing. And it just, as it gets more and more support, I think it's going to continue to be even better. I think that Sapphire is one of the best drawing colors, specifically in Hiram Flaversham. I think that with Popsicle is one of the strongest engines if it's just left like undealt with. But I also think the ability to have that card selection like we talked about is very, very strong. And I think that it has answers to almost everything, which can be a little bit annoying to play against. Now, the cons with this, I think, are that there are a lot of decisions to be made, especially if you're doing Fishbone Quill, if you're picking cards. You kind of really need to know what you need against specific decks. It's not always as straightforward or linear. There's a lot of different decisions, especially if you're playing like a Sapphire Steel where you're going to go into a whole new world and when to do all of that. And then all of the answers that we have are really, or like put the cards into the opponent's inkwell, which is a little bit of a downside, giving them just that advantage, letting them close the gap on the ink advantage that you've developed can sometimes feel bad, but usually it's better to do that than to have a Queen's Castle go unanswered for a certain amount of time. Now remember, all the cards that I talked about today are just a very small snapshot of what is available in Sapphire. And I really encourage you to just go through, look at all of the cards. There's a lot of different options. I was just looking at what is seeing the most competitive play, and that can be a little bit restricting at times. But there's a lot of really cool synergies, a lot of really cool effects to be explored, to be played with. And it's just a really, really a great game. So I encourage you to explore all the different cards and find something that you think works best for you. Thank you so much for checking out this video. We have one more video left in the series, Steel. And I appreciate you guys all watching and staying tuned in. If you have a moment, please, I would really appreciate if you guys just leave a comment, subscribe, let me know that you're engaging with this. It really helps, continue the motivation to finish this all. Thank you guys so much, and I'll see you in the next video.